Howdy. So, this will be the last character background story we do before we start the actual campaign story. I've already been writing up the campaign. Hopefully, they'll be out within the next few days. For everyone who's been interested, thank you very much for asking. I'm sorry it's taken so long, but I'm finally done with all my university work, excluding one exam, which is happening soon, but you're not here for that. Anyway, here's the story of Drake Starag. Starag. My friend knows how to pronounce it better than I do.
My earliest memories are those of the streets. God, the winters were cold in the capital. From what little I remember, my parents were poor. Can't even remember their faces. They died when I was young, purged by the aristocrats of King's Crest in an effort to reduce the overpopulation problems of the capital, while appeasing the masses by solving the food epidemic. Due to the barren tundra of the north, growing crops in the winter was impossible. So instead, the council was accoladed a budget by the Maiden's Hall government to purchase food for the northern towns to sustain them. Over half of the slums were wiped out in a single winter, under the guise of a rising plague from the Middle Kingdoms brought by the trading boats. All because the gold that was supposed to be used for food was siphoned to the oligarchs in charge. After that, I was on my own. Left in the freezing concrete jungle to fend for myself. I was alone and I didn't have much hope. I was living off scraps dumped by the taverns in the more wealthy side of the capital, and spent my nights sleeping in a torn sack near a brothel. The lanterns used to light their entrances provided at least a little warmth. I was counting the days left, wondering when my body would finally give out and allow me the sweet release of death. That was until I met Wyvern. He was a young boy like me, but instead he grew up in one of the many orphanages in the slums. I was too old to be accepted by one after my parents died, so unfortunately I didn't have that luxury. After Wyvern came of age and had to be kicked out of the orphanage, he started to meddle with the street gangs. The slums were full of them, and they often used the poorly funded orphanages as a sort of recruiting ground for their grunts. Wyvern was different, though. He wasn't content with just being someone's lackey. He wanted things he never had in his life. A home, a family, but most of all, power. If I could only have seen how strong his lust for power was. Wyvern took me in off the streets and brought me under the protection of his gang, though he insisted it would only be a temporary thing. He used to tell me things like, "We're going all the way to the top. And, you'll see, we'll be sitting in the very castle those pigs took down from us, one way or the other." For a few years we bounced from gang to gang, rising in rank as we did so. We mostly handled under-the-table jobs for aristocrats trying to advance their political agenda. Stealing, intimidation, the odd beating, nothing too serious. But as we kept rising through the ranks, we eventually caught the attention of the more devious parties, the Thieves Guild. Once we were contacted, we immediately took the opportunity to join. The King's Crest Thieves Guild. It was the stuff of legend. Some of the North's most revered thieves, assassins, and bounty hunters. It was the type of thing that kids from the slums could only dream of. We were finally getting away from the lowly dealing of street gangs and finding our own way in the world. It may have still been through illicit means, but we were one step closer to Wyvern's goal. Our goal. While in the guild, we were provided with a place to stay, tools to set up help with the robbery and deception, combat training with knives and daggers. It felt like we finally found a place to call home. Over the years, we went from lowly informants and tailing jobs for the guild to personal contracts for someone in the highest officials in all of King's Crest, all the while earning a pretty penny. We had enough to live our lives comfortably, and maybe one day have families of our own. But it wasn't enough for Wyvern. It never was. His next goal was taking over the leadership of the guild. "It's impossible," I told him. "You'll never make it out alive." But he never listened to me about that kind of thing. The guild's current leader was Endor Redane, a human known as one of the most famed rogues in the world, a skilled thief and master assassin. It was said that he even stole from the reserves vault of Maiden's Hall itself, and that he had personally assassinated one of the Elven Order's oldest and wisest members. There is no way with someone as little experience as Wyvern could even lay a finger on him. We didn't even know where to find him. In all of our time spent in the guild, we'd only seen him a handful of times, and that would be when the guild called in members from all around the world to discuss large jobs that required the best of the best. Something we never even dreamed of being a part of, never mind being considered for. After he told me his intent to kill the current leader and take his place, I've barely seen Wyvern around. He hadn't taken a contract in weeks and would only return occasionally at the crack of dawn, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I wouldn't even get the chance to talk to him. By the time I woke up, he'd be gone. Then one night, after I'd returned from a trailing job for a council member's wife who had been suspecting her husband of being unfaithful, he came bursting into my room. "I've done it!" he exclaimed. "What?" is all I asked. "I finally found a way to kill the leader of the guild." "Wyvern, you're nuts. You'll never even get close to him, never mind actually a chance to kill him." "No, listen to me. He's only human. He's not like one of those other monster races that can see in the dark. He'll be blind as a bat." "Oh, so that's your master plan? Get one of the greatest rogues to ever live in a dark room?" "I'm sure he'll be so scared quaking in his boots. I bet he'll just hand you the mantle of guild leader." "Oh, please don't hurt me. You found me greatest weakness. The dark." "Yeah, as if. I'm not talking about just an old darkness." He held out an old urn that looked like it had seen many wars. It was cracked and chipped. Whatever paint was once there had faded years ago. It had these strange markings on it that I'd never seen before. It didn't look like a language of any of the prominent races of any continent that I'd heard of, and I did a lot of foreign affairs for the guild in my early years. "Where did you get that?" "This old mate just gave it to me." He looked human, but something was off about him. Not that it mattered. He said that opening this urn would give me the power to manipulate light and move in the shadows as if I'd become one with them. "This is perfect for taking out that old fart that currently runs the guild." "You've got to let this go. We have everything we'd ever need here. A home, people to call friends, a steady income. Isn't that enough?" "Nah. Not for me. You can't just trust that man. Who knows what's inside it? It could be poison, it could be a spell that controls your mind, it could be— "I don't care, it's worth the risk." He took the urn and placed it upon the table in front of us. "I'll do anything to keep rising." I grabbed his shoulder to stop his hand from moving further as I reached out for the urn. "I can't let you do this. I can't let you destroy everything we've worked towards after all these years." He slapped my hand away and drew his dagger. "I knew you wouldn't understand, Drake. I knew that deep down you were just like the others, content on living a life of stagnation. Just like your parents did. And where are they now? Where are they?" He swung his dagger up at me and I quickly darted back. The dagger had just grazed my coat, leaving a tear. He wound up to take another swing, but before he could, I kicked out his leg from underneath him. Since he'd put all of his weight on that foot in order to lunge attack this time, he immediately lost balance. While falling, he stretched out of his body and tensed his legs in order to catch himself. The movement of his legs in order to stop himself from hitting the floor had knocked out one of the legs of the table, causing it to slip to one side and the urn to roll over and fall off the edge. We both watched as the urn fell. Everything started to darken as it got closer to the floor. It was as if the light in the room itself was being stripped away. My peripheral vision began to blacken until all that was left was the urn as it struck the floor. As it hit, a shockwave smashed both Wyvern and I against the wall. As I orientated myself after the hit, I turned to check if Wyvern was okay. He had his hand on his head as if nursing an injury, but his face was that of complete and utter terror. As I faced the center of the room to see what had caused such a horror to overcome him, I saw it. A spectre was standing in the center of the room where the urn had fallen. It had red eyes and claws like hands. It looked like it was made entirely out of shadow that was darker than anything I'd ever seen in my life, which was strange as we were all in a well-lit room. There should have been no shadows cast. Before I even got the chance to react, the shadow darted at me with its dagger-like claw outstretched, as if it was going to remove my head in one fell swoop. I raised my hands to brace myself, but before the creature reached me, Wyvern jumped in front of me, taking the impact. The next thing I knew, Wyvern was on the ground covered in blood, and the creature was standing back in its original position. Again it poised for an attack and leaped at me, and again I raised my arms in an attempt to lessen the damage even by a small amount. I waited for the creature to strike me. I waited for what seemed like an eternity, but rather than being struck with sudden, unbearable pain, it simply felt like a breeze had passed through me. I lowered my hands and the creature was gone. I felt different. I felt like something about me had changed when that strange feeling passed through me, but I had no time to consider it. I fell to the ground where Wyvern was and lifted him up. There was blood all over his body, but I couldn't find a single wound. I called out to him, "Wyvern! Wyvern, are you okay?" He opened his eyes and grinned at me. Something was off. This was the look of something sinister. Something of pure evil. This was it. This is exactly what I wanted. I can feel it. The power running through my veins. I tried to support him as he stood up, but he shrugged me off. "Hey, are you sure you're okay? What was that thing? What power are you talking about?" His grin disappeared, and instead, a look of disappointment crossed his face. It also chose you. Of course. It's as if the world itself is against me, never allowing me to rise above anyone else. Instead, I must stand among others like you. Even with this power, I'm forced to have an equal. Choose me? What are you? Before I could even finish my sentence, the whole room went black, just like when the urn fell. I felt a huge force smash against my chest, knocking all the air out of my lungs. As I fell to the ground, I saw Wyvern emerge from the darkness. As I began to lose consciousness, I reached out to him. I knew where he was going and what he was about to do. I tried to call out to him, but I had to breathe to do so. He kept his back turned to me and walked out the room. When I woke up, the sun had already risen. As I exited my room, I saw bodies of our fellow guild members scattered around the hallway. He really tried it. He tried to challenge the guild leader. I ran to the foyer of the guild, and just like the hallway to the dorms, it was littered with bodies of our fallen comrades. At the entrance of the guild, I saw Endor and a few other rogues from his personal unit with him. I asked what had happened. Wyvern happened. What do you mean? He tore up the old place, screaming my name and killing everyone in sight. By the time we reached him, he had already killed dozens of other guild members. What happened to him? We faced him. It was a tough fight and he managed to get away. He even managed to kill one of my personal unit. I'd never seen something like this. He blended into the shadows in a completely lit room. It was like he became invisible. He was good, but even still, we had him on the ropes before he made his escape. While fleeing, he was shouting that I was an unworthy leader and that he will one day return to take his place as the true leader of the guild. Can't believe it. I left the guild, left the capital. I felt something was different within me, and that I had changed just as Wyvern had. The language that I had seen on the urn now seemed familiar, as if I was reading some words that were written in common. I remember the urn was covered in the same word over and over again. Shadow Dancer. I decided I'd travel, try and find answers to what had happened to me and, more importantly, what had happened to Wyvern. Even now, I occasionally get the feeling that the shadows are a part of me. Sometimes when I move in the dark, it feels like I can bend them to my will. I need to find out what that thing was. For both our sakes.